Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are continuing our deep dive book club style discussion of Time Before Time, this time with volumes 3 and 4. And we've got a couple creator, not changes, but like extra creators to discuss.
Yeah. As we mentioned in the Zero, Joe Palmer, the original artist and co-creator, he only drew the first two arcs, and he does come back for the final issue at the very end, issue 29. But starting here in volume 3, and I guess excluding the one shots that we'll talk about at the end, issue 6 and issue 12. Starting with volume 3, which is issues 13 through 17. There are actually two artists here because there's kind of this volume 3 starts off with like that 2-issue side story on the bounty hunter, which is interesting there because those two issues, 13 and 14, are solo written by Roy McConville. So Declan Shalvey's not co-writing that one. So McConville writes those two solo, 13 and 14, with the art done by Ron Salas. The rest of the creative team, Chris O'Halloran still does all the colors, and Hasan Emeni still does all the lettering. But for those two, that little side story on hold on, I have his name here. Sebastian the bounty hunter.
Yes.
Which is just like another
from the
facet
guild.
Another So
that's the new organization being discussed.
It's clear they work with the syndicate both sends people back in time for the right amount, and they'll also hire bounty hunters to find maybe the people that they're looking for.
Right.
Some other, so
I've got
another,
so many notes on this. Yeah,
but it's another side of the underworld there. But that's like we get like his 2-story back, not his backstory, but kind of his intro into how he plays into our ongoing narrative of Tatsu and Nadia. But that's like that's like a little 2-issue arc, the beginning of volume 3, and then the rest of volume 3, issues 15, 16, and 17. Declan Shalvey's back with Roy McConville. They're co-writing again, and that art is done by Eric Zawadzki. And that finishes up volume 3. Volume 4, now we move into issues 19 to 23, and that art is done by Jorge Coelho. So, it's like they're bringing in artists just for these arcs, and because of how they structured volume 3, there are really 2 arcs there, because one is Sebastian's story, and then that ends with him getting the bounty to go hunt for I guess it doesn't end with that story's a little weird, and I guess let's start there real quick with those 2 issues, and either we can go one of two ways: either just the idea of the bounty hunters in this world and what their job is, or maybe a little more macro sense of like, how did you feel those 2 issues played within the story? Because I have thoughts on both.
I had thoughts. I'm going to start with your second thing there.
Okay.
Because I was going to say, and this is to my shame now, but this is where I trailed off in single issue.
I can see that.
Now, the important thing to remember here is not that I wasn't enjoying myself, but when you read a lot of books and they're coming out monthly, and you get 5 issues interlude, another 5 issues interlude, and then 2 unrelated things. It is
another interlude, essentially
3 or 4 months since I saw Tetsuya and
Nadia.
Yeah. And I think that was when I was like, I think this is going to hang together really well in trade, but it's kind of a big ask because I don't know if, you, I think, have a better memory than I do when it comes to story in general, but there are times where like I will sit down with an indie book that I'm pulling monthly and be like, good Lord, what happened last month? Who are these characters' names? Like, it's just like, and sometimes I'll go back and reread a little bit if it's really complicated. But a lot of times that's why I end up trade winning, is because I can't do like a full refresher in my head for every character, for every story I'm trying to follow, which is admittedly a lot of books. And I'm also reading, fiction and nonfiction and all kinds of other things. But so I'm curious because I know that you also kind of trailed off reading.
I trailed off earlier. Yeah.
You trailed off earlier. Okay.
Yeah. I stopped. I went to started waiting to trade after volume one. So I've only read the rest of this story in trade, but I understand what you're saying entirely because this little two issue interlude, as we'll call it, just like totally didn't work for me. Um,
Oh,
and
see, in hindsight, it really works for me.
oh,
Like
interesting,
when you
interesting.
realize how much you're gonna get, Sebastian.
Okay. I get that. I guess my point is the way I look at it here is that I don't need to know this guy's backstory. Like I just don't care. And this little two issue arc here, what we get is we get this very thing of like, hey, we're putting a crew together and you guys are going after these wanted fugitives, Tatsuo and Nadia. But before you do that, you got to go do this other thing first. You got to go break into the facility to get the tracking info of their pod, and then you can go track them, you know? So it's like before you can do the thing, we have to send you on those other quests to do this first thing, you know? And it's like we're setting up artificial stakes here. And of course, what it does is it weeds out the rest of whatever this crew was, and we get his backstory of like he needs money for his grandson's operation or whatnot, and I just don't care because what we'll get to is
I think that's a little harsh,
well,
but
okay, and that's fine, but here's the context in that is throughout so again we're not going to spoil. We see we've read it here. At some point, he does meet up with Nadia and Tatsuo. Nadia gets away with Kevin, and he ends up with Tatsuo, right? And even though he has to nurse him literally back to health into alive, he brings him back to the syndicate to try to collect the bounty, right? Because we know that Marston, who is Helge's father, right? Who's taking control over the syndicate. That whole storyline, I don't care about that either. Like the power struggle of the syndicate and all these people who are after Tatsuo and Nadia, like in my mind, they're all nameless faces. So I don't care. All I have to know is that there are outside forces coming after him. You know, I don't really care what the motivation is after them, after both Tatsuo and Nadia. There are characters, there are POV, and we know there are forces from different points in time who are trying to track them down for one reason or another because they are seen as being disrupting of what's supposed to happen. So in my mind, Sebastian is just another nameless face. Oh, it's a bounty hunter that someone picks up. Okay, then that makes sense. If we have, because I love the start with his intro where we jump back into
okay,
whatever
I
1800s,
love
whatever.
that conversation when he was pleading with the guy, like, just come pick me up in 10 years. What's the
Yeah,
difference to you?
exactly.
I
Yeah.
thought, why doesn't this happen more?
And I would have loved that if we got this. Like, who is this guy? What's this guy doing? And if that ended with him coming back, we're like, oh, he's a bounty hunter, nice. And he's like, all right, what's the next job? And then boom, he flashes Nadia and Tatsuo. And to me, that's all the backstory I need. You see, we've jumped back in time into whatever that was, the early 1900s or something like that. And it's like, oh, here's another time period, and this is another guy who was taken back into the past. Oh, but he wasn't taken there by the syndicate, by Oscar and Tatsuo or one of his cohorts. He was taken there by someone else, and someone sent a bounty to find him. I like that. And that's all the setup I would have needed. And just know that, okay, this Sebastian guy is a bounty hunter. This is another aspect of the criminal underworld, one that makes total sense in the world, right? If someone is paying, or sorry, if someone is providing a service to disappear back in time, then it stands to reason that someone else is providing a service to go find those people who didn't
Sure.
want them to leave in the first place.
Yeah.
And so
I'm ready to make my defense, but
okay, all right. So I don't mind the character. I love the introduction. What I didn't need was the intervening issue and a half of them doing this other job of meeting the other team of bounty hunters
the
and
little
having all
Suicide
of them
Squad,
die.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And doing all that just to end up where you assume he's going to be, which is he's off to track down Tatsuo and Nadia. We got to the place that we could have gotten to, in my mind, right at the beginning of issue 13, right after that initial scene of him tracking a bounty down. That tells me everything I need to know. I don't need to know about why he's doing it. He's doing it because he needs the money. Like to me,
Well,
it's like, you
and
know what I'm saying?
well, there are a couple different things. It's like, does he need the money for gambling debt or for a sick grandkid? Those are different things to me. Okay, so
Okay, fine. I guess
um,
maybe they're not so much to me in this world, but okay, go ahead.
okay,
What is your defense here?
okay. So my defense, and I would say the angle you're coming from is almost always where I am. I am almost always like, stop adding frill to tertiary characters. However, in this instance, I think there are a couple interesting writing moves. So you start with him in that flashback, and the guy seems to be making a perfectly reasonable request. Now we don't know what he did, why he's wanted, but he's like, "Look, come back in 10 years and get me." And Sebastian's like, "No," but it's not even answering. And he's like, "What's the difference to you? And if I'm not here in 10 years, you just come back to right now and grab me again." Um, and you're like, man, this guy is like cold hearted and ruthless. And he comes home, goes on this next mission, and you see what the other guild members are like. In contrast to Sebastian, they seem to take a sadistic pleasure in the work. When she tells that kid, like, "Oh, this is an EMP," and it's really just a bomb, I
That's
was
a funny
like,
scene. I'll grant you that. That
it is,
that
it is,
sequence there, that's
it
pretty
was
funny scene
so
in
unexpected and
isolation.
great. And I think Sebastian just kind of looks at her like, I cannot believe this is the company I keep, because he seems like a good guy forced to do these things uh, in order to protect something he loves, whereas that woman clearly just gets a laugh out of pain and violence. And so I think they're trying to set him apart as like, you know, in the same way Tetsuya split up families and did terrible things. He was doing it because the syndicate was pulling his strings. He is a better person than the things he ended up doing. And they're trying to show you Sebastian, who will be our antagonist for Tetsuya for the next arc, uh, similarly has his strings pulled by an organization that's pulling him against his better nature. Um, and that's not true of everyone in the syndicate, and it's not true of everyone in the guild. So I think he's saying like, this is almost like the Sam Seaborn, he's one of us, like notes. Whereas I think it sets you up to expect some kind of redemption story uh, for Sebastian and Tetsuya.
Okay. I can see that last part there and I guess that's also the like the story-addled red-pilled brain of like we're not going to spend that much time with this guy if he's just going to be a bounty hunter.
Exactly.
It's almost
Yeah.
like they're showing their hand. You're like, okay, if we're putting this much time in this guy and we're seeing his motivation, you know, he's a former soldier, so he probably doesn't feel like he has a whole lot of useful job skills other than hunting and tracking and killing people because what he did. So he puts that to use as a bounty hunter. He's doing it for his family, and you're right. I guess there is a part of the back of my brain that just instinctively knows like we're not gonna spend 2 issues with this guy for him just to track down Tatsuo and hand him over to the syndicate for only half the bounty because he only brought back half the crew.
Well,
Like
let's say
so.
in the hands of a good writer, you would not do that.
Yeah, well,
That
yeah,
said,
yeah.
I feel like my problem every time I'm watching like one of these prestige shows that people recommend to me, they're like, "Oh, it's so good." Uh, like the slow TV movement of like everything is artfully done and it's really pretty production and lighting and stuff like that. They're so frequently just spinning their wheels, telling unnecessary side quest stories, and like diluting the main narrative of a show. Um, that it irritates me. So I will say I feel very defensive about that, but after the end of volume 3, I felt like, okay, I think I'm glad I got that backstory on him. But in single issue, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, come on, let's keep it going here. We're on the clock because I knew that, like, I had the feeling. I think most readers have some instinct, like this is not a 150 issue ongoing series.
Sure,
Um,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, this is probably halfway or a third of the way finished, or maybe a quarter at most. Um, like, why are we still introducing new characters? And it's not even the only new character you're getting introduced to in this.
That's true. Yeah,
Now I'm with you on the whole who controls the syndicate thing.
yeah. That
That those are nameless, faceless,
yeah,
like
yeah,
they're all evil, and it's like, well, I'm gonna rule it now because I'm even more evil and
yeah.
crafty than you are. And I'm
Th-
like, that's not a motivation, and I don't
There
care.
was that whole sequence when like Marston calls like the meeting of like I guess the head or basically where he assassinates or he gets the head of Senate gets assassinated. Like he holds a war
Right.
council, like it's like in a boardroom scene, and it's like I don't know who any of these characters are, and I don't really care. And I had to
And it
write
doesn't
down.
matter.
Oh yeah, I had to write down Marston's name. The thing I actually know about Marston is that he's Helgi's father, and he looks like Helgi. Like they
Exactly.
almost
Yeah.
and but I couldn't remember his name. It was just oh yeah, that's the guy who isn't Helgi. The guy we met at the beginning. But other than that, I don't know anything about him, and I don't care about all of that. And just maybe we'll isolate. Because obviously at this point, we see we finish volume 3 with Nadia and Tatsuo together, and obviously it ends with Tatsuo's apparent death and Nadia and Kevin jump out. So the story kind of splits there. Let's maybe wrap up Tatsuo here. Um,
Oh yeah.
what I'll say is what I really loved in that volume in 15 through 17 there is it's not that there are multiple ways to do montages in comics.
Yeah.
A lot of times a lot of times you get like the big splash page, which we actually see later when Arcola City is like under attack, and you get like the big double splash page, and you can have different panels showing things happening simultaneously. But what they do here is so great, where they split the panels up, long rectangular panels, right? Where it's like you get the year, and then Tatsuo receiving some bad news, and then the year, little bit of the future. Tatsuo, and he's just getting older and older. He's getting
More
sicker and
decrepit,
sicker.
and yeah, and
Yeah,
you see
yeah.
like just his eyelids just
Yeah.
sinking.
And he's getting more gaunt, he's losing his hair, and they do the great thing of it's the same continuous conversation of listen, we understand your play, but nothing we can do for you here. Good luck next time, So it's the idea that he's having the exact same conversation with the doctors throughout the years. And that's such a quick, succinct way, to get us to God,
Can you
where do they end up?
imagine how excruciating it would have been
Yeah.
if it was like every single issue they do some stupid side quest in that
Yeah.
time while the pod's recharging, and then he gets the bad news at the end of each issue?
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, if you
That is
wanted to
spinning its
tell,
wheels. That's the definition of spinning your wheels because none of that would matter, whatever those side quests were.
right? Well, I was going to say the only way you could convince me to sit through that is if it was a 12 issue series about the inevitability of this guy's death. If it was if it was just like a different type of story altogether, and it was just
Sure.
like uh hey, everything we do is about side quests and distracting ourselves, and at the end of each story we're confronted with our own death. It's a really bleak version, but I would
Yeah. Well,
maybe 12 issues would be a bit much of that, but it's a
well,
little like Day Tripper or something.
I was going to say that the Day Tripper has something like that. And actually, in terms of like the countdown idea, as you were speaking about that, the most recent Human Target miniseries by Tom King and Greg Smallwood was like that. Christopher Chance, the Human Target, begins the series by he ingests a poison and is told he has 12 days to live, before it kills him. And so he has 12 days to figure out who killed him. And each issue is one day further, like one day. And he interacts with all these various people throughout, so it's that sort of thing of there's a countdown here and it all leads to the ultimate end, but it's one issue per one day. And you're right, they could have done this idea of one issue being one leap, one jump in time, but you're right. Completely different story, completely different narrative. But I'm totally with you. I like that they just skip through all of that and be like, so we know inherently that people are after them, but they're not like running into resistance every jump. It isn't like we make a jump. Tatsuo goes to find a doctor. Nadia and Kevin have to hide, and Tatsuo gets bad news. And oh no, the syndicate found them. There's a getaway, and then they jump away to safety. It isn't that sort of thing. It is just we burn through that, and we just see that Tatsuo there's jumping further and further into the future, and he's getting the same bad news to the point where so they land in 3987, and kind of that's when the rest of the story kicks off, because that's when Kevin finds for the first time, he finds evidence of the Arcola Institute, which are the people that took Nadia's family away from where they were supposed to go.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think uh let's talk about that last time period. The one where we learned that they're X many days from the end of the world.
Yes, sure.
And I love the writing choice that they never show us whether or not that's actually true.
Yeah.
That
There's the
like
one jump to the future we see like there's a whoever the Professor Arcola, whatever the founder, there's it looks like they're in a scene from like the Terminator where like they're fighting
that's
robots.
exactly the comp that I made.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was
But you're
like,
right.
oh, this looks like the opening of Terminator.
But that's like 2 pages only or something like that, and that's like in the early 4000 something like that. So maybe a handful of years from where we are, from where Tatsuo and Nadia and Kevin are at the moment. But yeah, they robot destruction, right? That's what the end of the world we're told is
Yeah.
that
Right. And you don't know who shot first, which
yes,
always seems like it would matter to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
If it's like, oh, we decided to turn off all the robots because someone was paranoid about them, and then they fought back. A little more sympathy for the Kevins of the world. Plus, Kevin makes you sympathetic with the robots. It's like, well,
yes, yeah,
clearly they're not all inherently
yeah.
evil and hell bent on destruction. Although Kevin has a particularly short fuse. Uh,
He's prone to violence. Yeah, he has anger management issues. So
That's a better way to say it.
yeah.
I was like, he's got a short fuse. You can piss him off, and he will slap you around.
But
So,
as you say, though, you see how he ends up being treated everywhere
but
he
yeah, he's
goes.
always provoked into it.
Yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah,
just not
yeah.
ever the bigger man. He's
No,
never going
no,
to
no,
walk
no,
away
no, no, no,
and,
no, no.
and say like, I really shouldn't do this.
Yeah,
No, it's whack.
yeah, yeah. But I think that this lingering omen or uh kind of fate of the robot revolution, the robot war, whatever. I mean, the idea that it hangs over it is very much the Matrix. It's very much the Terminator. It's all of that, right? That, you know, no one remembers how it started. No one knows. Even though we have time travel, no one seems to know where it came from. All we know is at some point in the future, the robots destroy the world. And um in this case, the Arcola Institute, they decided that the way to go is to start restart society way back in the past.
I
I don't
I
understand what their plan was.
I think
And
their plan was so I actually love this. I think the plan was robots can't travel back in time.
yeah,
As far as they know.
yeah,
So let's give humanity the longest possible runway with the greatest possible amount of prosperity. So we're going back to 4 million BC.
yeah. Billion
And
BC. Yeah.
4 billion BC, which by the way, you never really find out what's out in the wilderness. You're just
Nope.
like they're warned about it. And it just it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm glad we didn't like do a trip into the wilderness just so they could show us what they had out there, what's so clever about it.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also thought like that's really well written because I actually care to know more, but the story is pulling me onward.
Yeah.
And I think some world builders are so proud of everything they built in the world that they have to show it to you whether it fits in the story or not.
Yeah, there's an economy to that, and I do love, and so that is effectively that's Nadia's story. That's all of volume 4. We spend and is it called Arcola City, whatever it is. We spend it there, the place where Nadia's mother and sister, Mother Teresa and her sister Jetty. Her mother is now the mayor out there. This is a place they went to. They were supposed to jump to what was it, 2042 or something like that, right? That was where they're
Yeah.
supposed to go to. And as soon as they got there, before they even left the warehouse, they were recruited by the Arcol Institute to go further back in time, way back in time. And as you come to find out, they were lied to, right? They told them, oh, when your husband gets here and your other daughter, we'll take them with you. You can leave whenever if you don't like it, blah, blah, blah. And of course, none of that was true. It was a one-way ticket. But I'm with you. I love this idea. But I do have a couple of I have one larger existential question that I don't think the show is worried that the comic is worried about. And the one smaller issue that I think actually is a nitpick. The larger issue is um everyone, with the exception of Stan, who was our now crazy cyborg person, um, everyone is there under the understanding that the past can't be changed, right?
Yep.
So the idea that the Arcola Institute is going from the far future into the mega distant past to restart society or establish society, by having done that, it implies that they've always done that because we're working with a closed loop system here, right?
Yes.
So the idea that their plan to save humanity was the thing that they always did, which means it will ultimately always lead to robot Armageddon, which will force them to go,
Right. No,
yeah,
they don't care how it ends 4 billion, 4,000 years from now.
yeah.
I think they're
Okay.
like, we bought ourselves 4 billion, 4,000 years of good life. And they're
We bought
still
humanity.
mortal
We bought
beings.
ourselves, right? The larger
Yeah,
ourselves.
humanity,
Yeah.
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 Although you would think in a closed loop system, they would say, hey, what's that location we scouted for Arcola? What is it like in our current world? Because that's
Yeah.
how we know it will end. But
Yeah.
I think they're just like, we don't want to live under the fear of knowing there's 5 years until the robot uprising.
Yeah. Okay.
And
All right.
and
All right.
that's really all they've it's there's a selfishness to it, as there is
Definitely.
with all time travel in this world. But there's also a lot of, little philosophical nuggets in here.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about nitpicks, I want to get into, and this is one of those things where, like, I think some people just can't handle time travel stories. They just
Hmm.
ask too many questions like what I'm about to ask.
Sure.
And I just go along for the ride. And as long as the narrative works,
Well,
I'm
yeah,
willing to accept the premise of the time travel.
I was gonna say I think it depends on what the perceived or stated intention of the authors or creators are. If,
Exactly.
like as we mentioned early on, this is a story that has time travel. It's not really about time travel.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
yeah, but anyway, yeah. So
Okay. So
I have
so
a nitpick.
here's
I have a nitpick, and I'm curious what yours is as well. Let's go with yours here first.
it might be the same, but
Okay.
uh the very clever device they use once we find out that Tatsu is not dead, this is volume
Yeah.
4, he is delivered, he tries to pay his way out. It does turns out he
Yeah.
doesn't have 20,000.
Yeah.
Um and if he did, he would want that for a cure. Otherwise, he would pay his way out and then die immediately.
Yeah.
Whatever. But um, they get him working for the syndicate again with this threat of saying, we know when Oscar dies, we can jump right into the moment before he takes that pill
Yeah.
and bring him back here and just make his life last so much longer than he wants it to. It's terrible. And that is enough motivation for Tetsuo to do what he hates doing, what's literally killing him, even though they're giving him enough medication to
Or
keep him alive.
at least we assume to. We leave him. He's still sitting in the chair, but the presumption is he's going to concede. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh yeah, I may have
Yeah.
been, I may have accidentally jumped ahead there.
Yeah, but yeah, but you're right. The threat is given here.
Okay, so
Marston gives a threat of Oscar and that whole thing of
yeah, so
we know Oscar's going to die, but we're going to jump in and stop him.
I think great threat, and here's where my wrinkle comes in. If Marston is smart enough to come up with that plan, why don't they jump back to the conversation with Tetsuo and Oscar to catch Tetsuo when they're going through this massive quest to get him? And I think the answer is something along the lines of Minority Report logic, which, I mean, this is what I told myself. I was like, well, you can't jump back then because he hadn't escaped yet. Yes, he intended to,
Yeah.
but Nadia hadn't killed Helgi yet, and you can't arrest people for future crimes.
Well,
Like that has to be a concession of this time travel.
yes, and it is also that is part of it. It is also because it is a closed loop system. It is the if you go way back to the Paper Girls conversation, the very beginning of the show that we started, I talked about kind of various pop culture ideas of time travel, and the closed loop time travel. The example I talked about was used in Harry Potter in Prisoner of Azkaban. The idea of the reason that Marston can't go back to that conversation between Oscar and Tatsuo is because he wasn't there when we first saw it. So he can't go back to something that we already know he wasn't there for. So the example I gave from Harry Potter in Prisoner of Azkaban, there is a moment when uh Hermione has slept through class and missed class because she's been going to so many, right?
Right.
And when Harry and Ron find her, they're like, "Hey, you missed class." She freaks out and leaves. What she can't do is go back in time and go to that class that she missed
And
because
alter everyone's memory.
yeah,
Yeah.
because she has already missed it. So she could only go back in time in from the future if she's already done it. So Marston can't jump back to that moment. He can't go back into the
But then
timeline.
does that also mean his threat is empty and he couldn't actually go back to when Oscar took that pill
Well, no, because
because he wasn't there?
no, because we don't see him actually. We don't see Oscar actually die. The last thing we see of Oscar is he is giving that recorded message, basically as like a send off, being like, "I hated you, I hated working for you," blah 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 blah. So we don't actually see him die. We know he's close to the end. He's like in a wheelchair, and he looks like Tatsuo did at the end, right? Kind of the rad sickening. But we don't actually see him take the pill. So there you could make the presumption that they could still someone could jump in and prevent him from dying in that way because we never actually saw him die. It's kind of like how um there was a moment when I thought at the end of three that Tatsuo dies there. He dies. He kind of sacrifices himself so Kevin and Nadia can take the pod back way back in the past to the Arcola Society City. Um, and I thought for a moment, it was like, all right, this is a time travel story. So Tatsuo is probably not actually. They could
Well, I
jump back
mean,
in time. They
yeah.
could jump back in time and grab an earlier version of him. And then I realized, no, they couldn't do that. You can't go back into his timeline and take him out back in the future because that means he wouldn't be there to do all the things we saw him do in the story, And of course, they found another way around it. They're in the future with highly advanced medical capabilities. They're able to restore his body and yada yada whatever. But you can't jump back into the timeline and do something that we have already seen what the outcome is. So that's kind of the limiting factor of the closed loop system, which is what everyone believes, everyone except for Stan, our friendly neighborhood cyborg, everyone believes is the case. You can't change anything. So that's why they can't jump back and take an Oscar or Tatsuo from the past before they've done anything. Again, you're right, like the Minority Report idea. But in this case, I think it's literal. They haven't done it yet. And so you can't interrupt that because they have to do those things in order to get to the Tatsuo that we have now and the Oscar that we have now. The Oscar that goes in the future and goes through everything it goes through, being detained in prison and all that stuff, yada, 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 to come back and deliver that final message. All that stuff has to happen. And so you can only pluck someone from a time at which is still that person's future, however limited it may be.
Got it. Yeah, I think that tracks. The closed loop thing just seems like it's prone to lots of contradictions, but I
Oh,
think
totally
that's
is.
all time travel
Yeah.
stories. And that's why I was saying the closed loop one, if someone really did it
Yeah.
and chose to tell the story in chronological order, I think I was talking about this in the Zero. That would be the coolest concept to me, where like
Yeah.
what you're reading, even though it's in timeline order, makes no sense. And there's lots of extras in every scene where you're like,
Yeah.
that person's in focus, but I don't know who that is or why. And you only find out later that they jump back to that moment. And it's like you watch the story play out and then you basically have to read it twice to figure out what happened.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, which is hilarious that a linear story would be the postmodern way of telling
Yeah.
it's the
The
deconstructed,
chronological.
right? The chronological way is the deconstructed version of the time travel story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
like every story since Pulp Fiction has been deconstructed by just scrambling the timeline for dramatic effect.
Mhm.
Sometimes to great effect, and sometimes like I don't think this changed the story at all. You just thought it was boring to tell it in order.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Or when you have a time travel story, it's because you're following the characters chronologically through their life, not chronologically through
correct. Yeah.
absolute time. So yeah, so when you go to a certain point and then you jump back in the past, it doesn't matter what time framing you're in, the character is still progressing in in a linear time way. So it's you're following their perspective, and I think that's essentially what we get here. But again, as we talked about, the specifics of the time travel, if you get bogged down in that for this story, I think you're gonna very much get lost in the forest of the trees. Like you're gonna get bogged down. My nitpick, actually, as much as I really enjoy Volume 4, and I think Volume 4 might be my favorite of the four we've read so far. The volume, I like being in there in the Arcola city there, way in the past. Nadia dealing with their family and kind of the fallout and all the stuff here. My nitpick is they send patrols out looking for robots, or the idea that they're worried about the existence of robots at all makes no sense to me. Because as far as they know, robots can't go back in time, correct? That's why they did this, right? Technology doesn't travel. Right. That's one of the absolute rules. So their reaction once they see Kevin, a robot, and they totally freak out and want to kill it, that makes sense to me. But up until they physically see and interact with Kevin, the mere concept of a robot existing back in time should not even be in their mindset. That should be an impossibility. So that shouldn't even be a worry. They shouldn't even have safeguards against it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Except that these are all first generation settlers who lived their entire lives with robot paranoia. Like the whole reason this society exists is the break glass in case of emergency because of this thing. And when they see Kevin, it's just like a trigger of, oh my gosh, we threw our lives away. There's no way for us to go forward now, and we're stuck here with robots.
100% once they see Kevin. But I'm saying up until they are confronted with the idea that a single robot can go back in time, that shouldn't even be a possibility. There should, like, they talk about, there was, saying, so they were saying there were reports of a robot on the outskirts, which we know now was the sightings of Kevin, who is a cyborg. But
not Kevin.
Not Kevin. Sorry, not Kevin. Stan? Stan. Thank you. Yeah. So he was the sightings there. But my point is that shouldn't even have been a thing, because the idea of a robot at all going back in time should not have been on the basis of their society. You know what I'm saying? Like, that shouldn't have been a worry. They shouldn't have been.
Now, it does seem like
something they thought about.
If you have a totalitarian leader, that does seem like a really good control. And whipping the people into shape through fictitious narratives with fear is something we know works politically.
Yes.
Fictional narratives said often enough will scare people into behavior. We have painfully recent evidence of that.
100%. But
yes, everyone should have been able to see the flimsy logic of it.
Yeah. Even when the first reports of Kevin are there, people are still being like, but how does technology travel? It's not supposed to be able to do that. Well, if you already inherently know that it's not supposed to be able to do that, then why are you worried about it in the first place? The theoretical idea of a robot being in your world should not have worked on you, because that's as far as you know, a fundamental law of time travel, and right. So just the build up to that.
To be fair, these people who were like kidnapped or, tricked or deceived or whatever into going back in time, they weren't syndicate members. They didn't know the rules of time travel.
But I'm sure it's been explained to them, though.
Whatever has been explained to them.
At least the way Arcola tells them. And what you have to think, tell them is the world's going to end here. So we got to go back in time. But they also know, I'm sure they're told the same thing that Tatsuo and Oscar told, like what they told Stan when he went back to 1987. You can't bring your phone. It's not going to work. There's no Wi-Fi yet. Like there's a harsh reality you reach when you get back in the past. And if you brought technology with you, and at the same time, someone like Teresa and Jetty, they would have been told that by the syndicate when they went back to 2042 to begin with,
Right.
So it's just a matter of then they went back 4.5 billion years after that. So yeah, so that again, that's just a nitpick of like how their society works. But again, once Kevin is revealed and everyone freaks out, and then of course then we see Stan in his cyborg form. all of that reaction makes total sense to me because now you're right. Now the thing that presumably they thought could not be possible is here, and they're so worried about robots that the reaction is so over the top, is so ridiculous. But that part makes sense to me from there, and I think that's the part I really like about being in that Arcola city is
Yeah, I
is
mean, I
is
think the
seeing what that
mere
society set up.
concept of 4 billion BC futurism is
Yes,
like so amusing to me
definitely,
that I could
definitely.
just see them, sitting around over lunch discussing that and just being like, we're gonna find a way to make it work. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
will it be flawless? No. Could the book have been only that? No. Can you do it for an arc? Absolutely.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. You can hand wave that. 'Cause I think at one point, I think it's Jetty. I think when she's talking, we get a bit of a exposition dump when she's talking with Nadia, basically like how long it took them being Arcola to figure out how to build the city. And it's one of those ideas of like, well, you have time travel, right? And so like they've been coming back here for thousands of years to build this, you know? And by the time that, so you can do magic hand wavy time stuff by being like, yeah, they weren't, they, you know, uh, Jetty and all them they're not the first people there. All these people came before from all these different times in the Arcola's history and past to build this city, and it's here now, and that's all you got to know.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to, it's time travel stuff there. But I'm
So
totally with you.
I
Just
have
the
one
idea
more
of it
note
being existing.
on the whole Arcola thing,
Sure.
which gets into Nadia's character story.
Okay.
We see um, her sister seems pretty cool, like her.
Yeah.
Her mom, just the worst. And
Yeah.
she blames her mom's transformation into this, like, crass political figure, you
She's the
know.
mayor. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, like, it's like, what did politics do to you? And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if this is actually another beat in the direction of nostalgia and her childhood lens. Like, maybe her mom was always this person and she thrived in this place because of that. But she was a kid last time she saw her mom, so she just didn't realize it. And now as an adult, she can realize, like, oh, my mom actually wasn't all she was cracked up to be in my head. But
Could be.
she's not willing to confront that. She's not willing to say, oh, maybe my mom uh wasn't always cutthroat. It must be this place that's done it to her.
Well,
Uh
and I think it goes back to the idea of like her family was looking to be on the run to begin with, you know? So what situation were they in that caused this, you know? Why is this family with two young kids? Why are they looking to make a run? Why are they going to the syndicate to try to get out of there in the first place? Yes, their family got screwed in the deal in that only two of them could go. The Nadia
but I
left
think
behind.
you have to be a little opportunistic and political in your calculus
It-
to take that anyway.
well, and I'm agreeing with you there. The idea that Nadia, because she was a child at the time, although maybe she was what, like 10 or something, that's still a child, whatever, not understanding what is, maybe thinking she understands, oh, we're going back in time, whatever, but not understanding the specifics because they don't know their parents' business. They don't know what's going on there. And so, yeah, when she sees that, uh, when her mom and Jenny make the first jump and then decide to make the second jump, Teresa thinks she's doing it for her family. And yes, she was lied to, but again, what put you in that circumstance to begin with are decisions that they made that, yeah, maybe were hidden to Nadia at the time. So she doesn't know the full story. She doesn't see the full character of her mom. And I think you're right there. This idea of like she feels betrayed. Like, oh, you married someone else, you have another child, you moved on, you forgot about us. And Jenny's like, wait a minute, like how can you like that accusation is so out of pocket, it's
Well,
like,
yes,
you know,
from there, each character's position makes total sense from where they are. One of them has been there for 10 years. It's like,
I,
we have no way forward, no way
I
to
don't
get
think
you,
Nadia
no way to
is
send a
that. I don't
message.
think Nadia is defensible. Actually, I don't think it is defensible. because her
I
idea is like, oh, you forgot about us, and
I
like
think
you
she's
abandoned us.
reverted to exactly the age when they left. And she did
That's
have to
fair.
care for her
That's
dad.
fair. That's fair.
And, her whole life has been about steal a pod, go join them.
Yeah.
Everything will be right where I left it off. And it's like, that's not how reality works. But
Yeah.
that's like trying to explain that to the 10-year-old. Like she never grew up and accepted what happened. And in theory, if the past is the past, like if her family were going to reach out to her or try to send a message to her in her present timeline, they would have already done that. She would have known that as soon as she went home from, this assuming she had an understanding of closed loop travel, but if they had any way to reach out and tell them, "Hey, you make it, we're reunited," they would have done that and they would have had it as soon as they got home from there. I think her dad should have told her we will never see them again. Maybe he didn't have the heart to say that. Maybe he was too dumb or dense to realize that. But
Well, I don't think I don't think. I mean, well, he didn't know that they jumped. They took a second jump. You know.
even if they didn't take the second jump, if they went back to the time they said they were going to,
Uh, uh.
there would have been, in theory, some way to record a message, send a message forward to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, we made
Which
it.
we
We're
see all the
safe."
time. We've seen that
Exactly.
throughout the syndicate. You lay a message, and then someone in 100,000 years, whatever, sees it, and that tells them to send someone else back in time. Yeah, there's a daisy chain effect there. You are right though that they could have now maybe, and again, this could have been Arcola. We're not sending messages to the future, things like that. But yeah, no, the idea that Nadia reverted back to the age in which she lost her mom and sister
Right.
emotionally.
All she wanted, which
That that, that
that's
makes a
the
lot of sense
real
to me.
time travel of the story,
That
right?
makes a
Is
lot of
that
sense to me. Yeah.
people revert to maturity, people fail to age after certain traumatic events. And, I love when Kevin is home shopping through all these times
Oh
and he
yeah.
says, you know, it's all a bit too cyclical for me. Is this, and I thought to myself, is that really the thesis of this book? Is that, I think that is the grand argument of Time Before Time, which is like, they're all looking for the time before time. They're all looking for a certain point in
Mhm.
time. And the point in time is not on the timeline. They're all looking for a point of time in their life. Tetsuo is looking for the point in time where he and Oscar can be friends and they're free of the syndicate. Nadia is looking for the point in time where she's reunited with her family. Kevin is looking for a time, well, eventually,
That
where the
robots
robots
aren't. Yeah.
reign.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not hated, but also like, why not live in the time where they reign, and can go free? And he's like, and I would like to see a good 300-year stint without a total epic
Yeah.
collapse of human
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet. And so
Well,
he's still shopping.
I think it goes back to what we said either last week or in the zero, the idea of 2140, which is our home time, right? Because that's where
Yeah.
Tatsuo and starts in. What makes that time so bad? Why do people want to leave? And
Yeah.
the answer probably is it's not really that bad. It's just life, it's society. But the people in it see that there's no way out. And the people who are in it being like, my life is terrible. I got to get out of here. Because we know
You
that
blame everything except
yeah, yeah,
like
that
the actual things in your life.
exactly. Because we know that those guys have seen 1,000 years in the future and society still exists. Is it any better or any worse than what they have now? It doesn't matter. They think what right now is so bad, we got to get out of here.
Yep.
And you're right. The answer is always go back to the past because we have this thinking, this mindset of it was always better then. But it's really just people in 1987 thinking about, man, if we can go back to the 1950s and been better,
Right.
it's the same sort of thing. So yeah, it is that perpetual cycle. And I think that's part of why you have a character like Kevin, right? You have the robot. He's like the Greek chorus. He's the non-human person who can point out these things. And I think that it's part of what makes the character fun. Also, again, the anger management issues are always great.
Yeah. Well, so I need to find the flashback. I think it might be in issue 22. Yeah. It is in issue 22 when you go back to Stan's childhood. Presumably he's still in the late 80s, early 90s at this
Early
point.
90s at that point. Yeah, yeah.
And he's talking to his mom and she says, "I'm really sorry, Stan. I really thought things were going to be better when we came back here. Maybe the world's just cruel no matter what time you're in."
Yeah.
And I think, first of all, that's probably going to be the quote for this episode.
Yeah,
You know,
I had
we
that
always
pulled.
have the episode description with a quote from the series. And I'm like, it's either that or Kevin's quote or the two of them side by side. And it's like, that's really what the world, it's like there are lots of problems in life, and life is hard and life is painful. And each time period you're in has its own challenges, and you cannot escape the pain and problems and struggle of life by simply going to another time
Yeah.
because your problems are yours and they follow
Mhm.
you. And I think that's what this series is ultimately about. And I think it surfaces often enough to remind you what the book's really about, but they never are beating you over the head with it. And I think that's why I love this. Like volumes 3 and 4 here, we only talk about books we like on this podcast. We don't bring up books to rag on them. I can't remember the last time I was this excited for a discussion, just because I felt like there's so many good quotes. There's like, and like this series is absolutely on fire right now, especially compared to volumes 1 and 2. Like these are both just light years ahead in like development and intrigue and character
I,
focus.
for the main narrative.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. As I
I
said,
think the main
the,
narrative and the
they're
world
not
building have
perfect because
really come
I
into
think some,
focus.
yeah, I think someone, again, all the stuff with the behind the scenes stuff, the syndicate, like none of that I care about. And after Sebastian and Tatsuo together, like when he's, like the conversation in the field when like he kind of gets like that is interesting. Once he gets back to the syndicate and Marston's, maybe it's just the Marston character I don't care about. Anytime he's on the page, I'm like, I don't care about any of this, But
The
I
only
said
thing he did that I cared about is when he screws Sebastian out of his money, because he brings back Tatsuya and he's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Sorry, it's all or
yeah,
nothing."
don't tell me
And
half. Yeah,
um and that I think makes you, I mean, it moves Sebastian from a antagonist to a protagonist. And the
it
intriguing thing is now we have two protagonists who are each other's antagonists.
yes, enemy
And
into my
it's like,
enemy kind of
right,
thing.
but
Yeah,
no, but I'm rooting for Sebastian because of his grandkid, and he's trying to be as above board as he can while doing something that is like not a great profession.
hmm
I'm cheering for Tetsuya. Again, I don't know why he's in debt to the syndicate to begin with. He could have done something terrible, and he himself is seeking redemption. Either way, I want both of these characters to get what they need. But the problem is, for one of the characters that I like to get what they want or need, the other character I'm rooting for has to suffer.
yeah,
So for Tetsuya to thrive, Sebastian's grandkid has to die. And for Sebastian's grandkid to live and Sebastian to be happy, Tetsuya has to suffer and or die. And I think that's a great place to be in, because Sebastian's definitely in the anti-hero territory, and Tetsuya might be as well, because we don't know his backstory.
yeah.
He's our protagonist because he's our protagonist.
Yeah,
Like
he's
he's
our
our way into the
yeah,
story.
yeah,
Who's who we're
yeah,
following. He's the lens we have on things.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but we don't really know if he's a great person. We know he
Well,
has remorse over what he did.
and he even kind of says like when he overhears this is in volume 2, right? When they're in 2042 and Nadia is talking with her former neighbor and
Oh yeah,
Tatsuo
yeah.
kind of overhears and Nadia's neighbors being like, listen, I don't know who this guy is, but if he works for the syndicate, can't be that good, you know?
Right.
And Tatsuo even he kind of cops the fact, being like, he doesn't outright say what he did to get in debt, but he does kind of fess up to the idea of, yeah, didn't
Some
like,
shady stuff.
yeah, it wasn't that good, It doesn't matter what you think of it is or the specifics, just know that it wasn't on the up and up. And so, yeah, I didn't find the way he ended all that interesting, although knowing, and this is maybe one of those things that of we talk about reading if it were in single issue versus now when we know it's complete. Like I said, I'm all in on Nadia's story. That again, the whole thing on
Yeah.
Arcola City, I loved all that. I was so locked in. I love the interplay with her and potentially now her older younger sister now. Jenny makes the comment like I did the math, and
Oh
I
yeah.
think I think I'm the older sister now. But that thing, her and her mother, and everything about that was so good. And when you look at it, and we know that there are two volumes left in the story, except there aren't really two volumes left. There's actually only one volume left because we know that volume 6 is the collection of one-shot stories. You
Right.
know, so now, uh, having read this in trade in collection, not when it was coming out, I get to the end of volume 4 and be like, okay, so Nadia, Kevin, and Jenny, they found a way to leave Arcola City. They're jumping somewhere else. Sebastian is disgruntled. Tatsuo is back under the helm of the syndicate. How is all this going to come together? And I don't really care about how because I know there's only one volume left, so it's going to happen. Versus, let's say if you're reading this issue to issue, as it was coming out, without the knowledge of how long this was going to go, you could be like, well, I don't know, I am I going to spend time on something? How much longer are they going to tread water? Because the story, however it
Right.
ends,
It
it's
has to converge.
it's going to end, exactly. It's going to end with everyone coming together. How long is that going to take? Because we're reading it now at the end, and we know that there's only one narrative arc left, one cohesive narrative arc left in volume 5. I'm totally down for it. My mindset is I know we're at the end now. So regardless of if it's a good ending or a bad ending, or if I like it or if I don't, I like it. I know we're getting the end. And so if it was a month to month read for me, I think, and even if I had made it this far with it, I think I would still be on some shaky ground. I think where they leave it here is interesting for when it's a final act. I think it's less interesting if you don't know how many issues are left. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Well, I mean, I think that's the tricky thing about indie comics in
It
general.
totally
It's
is.
like, unless you're trying to peer into the future and looking at solicits and saying, "Oh, it ends
Yeah.
in 6 issues,"
Yeah. Yeah.
that'll frame the way you think of it.
It-
But and like and that's different from the ongoing stuff of like Batman and Superman, where
it's never
however it
ending.
ends,
Yeah.
it's not ending.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's going forever in one direction. Whereas this is like, yeah, this could have been the second from last issue when you're reading it, or it could be halfway through the series. And I think that is disorienting. And that's when, the same thing with Prestige TV, when you're like, how invested do I get in this? Is it going to be 3 seasons? Is it going to be 1 season? Is it
Yeah.
over at the end of this? That's like when I was trying to needle Tim Seeley and Mike Norton on like, is Revival going to be like one Prestige
Yeah.
format, 8 issue or 8 episodes here, 10 ish, or is it going to be 3 seasons? And they were like, can't really talk about it. And I was like,
Because they don't know. They don't know. I'm sure it was set up to be. It's the idea that it could be ongoing, but yeah, it may just be one season. It is unclear. So yeah, and so I would be interested, and this is I think with something we've talked about a lot with these books is when was it made aware to the reader? When did the creators make it aware to the reader that the series was coming to an end? Like
yeah,
when did they say this is ending at 29? If you look at the solicits, and I'd have to double check the exact publication dates, but solicits need to be minimum 3 months in advance. So you're sitting at issue 26 when that comes out that month. There would have to be a solicit that month from Image saying that 29 is the final issue. So you're in the middle of the final arc here, a couple issues in. I don't know. Maybe they announced beforehand. They said, "Hey, this is the final arc. We're ending at 29." So when you pick up issue 25 there, that it's the end. I don't know how that is. I haven't researched that, but I'd be curious because all that stuff affects the reading experience. If
totally.
you
Yeah.
if you know that's coming, it's the difference between the ongoing versus the binge. When you have, like we have now, the completed trades, you know exactly how much story is left. And the only way you get that in the single issues is that the creators say, "Hey, we're ending this on this issue." And you going into it, oh, this is the
Which
final
like
arc.
Brian K. Vaughan said that with Saga.
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
from he was like it's
Yeah.
106 or whatever it is.
108. Yeah, 108.
108.
So
Yeah.
so no matter and they do all those in 6 issue arcs. So you know that you're going to get 6 issues, here's a story, 6 issues, here's a story, and all the way until they get to 108, however long it takes them, they're going to get there. And not many creators have the luxury to say we're doing 108 of this and
Over the
have
course of
everyone
like 15 years.
yeah, and
Yeah.
have a publisher be like, yeah, great idea, but when you're Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, you can do that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
There are very, very, very few creators that can do that. Brubaker and Phillips can write their own, right? They can say we're publishing whatever we want, and Image or whoever else would be like, yep, you do it, you're good.
Yep. Yep.
You want to do original graphic novels, that's fine. You want to do a 90 page, a 90 issue ongoing of something, do that too. Whatever they want, they can do. As much as I love Declan Shalvey and as much as his work has been out there, like he doesn't have that juice, and most creators don't have that juice when
He
they
hasn't
can
earned it
say,
yet. We'll put it that way.
and very few ever get there. Even some of the biggest writers right now, a guy like someone like Scott Snyder, Tom King, whatever these guys have they take an independent book, a creator-owned book. It's hard if they say, hey, this is going to be 12 issues. Sure, most people are like, yeah, great, do 12 issues. If you come in from the jump and be like, I want to do 70 and like guarantee me 70 issues, most places are going to balk at that. Even the biggest names in comics, very few ever get there. So the idea that you can plan your ending so far ahead is incredibly rare. But in the case of a book like this, you could do it 5, 6 issues out. You could decide
Right.
this is the
Yeah.
last
You can
arc.
decide when to pull the plug as long as you know
Yeah.
where you're going.
Exactly. So I do wonder at what point they came in, and if they even did announce to the readers saying, "Hey," and maybe this it's the kind of thing that would have been in the back matter of the issue. Like in issue 25 or maybe 25 would be the perfect spot for it. The first issue of the final arc. If in that issue they'd be like, "Hey, this is the final arc. We're getting to the end. Buckle in." And that gets readers excited for it. That's the kind of thing you see a lot of creators do, and I wonder if McConville and Shelby did that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe we'll have the chance to ask it to them.
Yeah, it
We
would be
haven't
awesome.
reached out yet, but would love to see it. Those are the end of my notes, by the way, for 3 and 4.
Those end of my kind of narrative story notes. I do have some other kind of production notes I want to kind of touch on, which we like to highlight whenever we can. If you have nothing else.
No, yeah, go for it.
One thing we talked about last week was with Joe Palmer doing the art for those first 2 arcs there. The story is presented on the page very very straightforward.
Yes.
There's not a lot of crazy paneling. They do the thing where it's like the one splash page, right? Like the one full page splash is just like the end of an issue. And so that's like the tease into what comes in either the next chapter of the trade or what's coming next month. But they didn't really go out of their way to do a lot of kind of crazy paneling, even like off-center paneling. It's all very rectangular. Whether they're it's very straight-lined edges, and they weren't trying to do a lot with the storytelling through the paneling, which is that's a choice that creators make in terms of how they want to present it on the page. I'm not saying every book has to push the boundaries of crazy paneling and page layout and stuff like that, but in the first 2 arcs, they're very straightforward, and I think we see that still in volumes 3 when we had both Ron Salas and Eric Zawatsky kind of doing the art there. It really isn't until we get to volume 4, Jorge Coelho's art there, where we start seeing a little bit of something different there. At the beginning of issue 23, I'm looking at here, we actually have a double page splash. I think I alluded to it earlier. That's when Stan is kind of running these attacks on Arcola City. So we actually have this double page splash that's got some kind of sideways paneling on it. That's a way to represent all these things happening kind of simultaneously at the same time. We hadn't seen that sort of visual representation up until that point. And so, it was kind of a standout when it did happen. And there were even a couple pages a little earlier in volume four and maybe volume three when we just had like non-rectangular panels. Like we even had some like maybe trapezoidal panels it's little things, but when a panel starts left to right and it's wide and it goes thinner, it narrows the focus. And then when the panel below it goes from right to left in the same shape and narrows, all these things kind of change and force your eye line in a certain way. And it's why artists do that on their pages, why they get creative with the paneling. But so we just hadn't seen that. They hadn't brought that element of the storytelling into this book. It wasn't really necessary. It wasn't the kind of story they were telling. So when it does jump in and you have some of these non-rectangular panels, or you all of a sudden have a double splash page, it sticks out and it can be notable of like, oh yeah, there are other ways they can tell the story. And it's like, maybe this was the influence of some of the other artists that came in that Joe Palmer wasn't, I don't want to say capable of that's harsh because I don't know all of his work, but it was a choice they made early to not have these big splash pages or irregular shaped panels that they slowly introduce in these two arcs here. And I think maybe that's just because they had different artists in. It's the kind of thing that you get when you have guest artists. You don't just get a slight tweak in how characters are drawn and things like that. You get some different storytelling approaches.
Yeah, to me, it's like different directors on a TV show. So,
Yeah.
if
Or
you
different
watch,
cinematographer kind of thing. Yeah.
right, yeah, if you watch, The West Wing season one, which just keep the story arcs drinking game alive,
Sure.
they're all going to have walk and talks, right? And they're
Mhm.
all playing with the same characters on the same set.
And
When
Sorkin
you
has written all of them, so it's the same
Sorkin's written
dialogue.
all of them, yeah. But there are still variables. When Alex Graves is there, he is going to do those spinning shots, those 360 shots around characters.
Yeah.
Tommy
Yeah.
Schlamme would never do that. To him, it feels, well, first of all, most of the actors hate it, but Alex Graves loves it. And you can watch Alex Graves do, Game of Thrones or anything else he's done, always the 360 shots. He's always moving, always circling the characters. And I think it's one of those things where, I mean, mileage may vary. There are times when I'm like, that's incredible. There's like one in season 6 where they're like at a ball or something and that, lights are dangling low and
I
you
remember
see
that. Yeah.
there's Josh Malina having his flirty scene
Yeah.
with what's her face, Kate Banks Harper. And there's a 360 there that they use the 360 to wipe the screen and cut to different parts of the room. It's like, oh my gosh, stunning. Tommy Schlamme not only wouldn't do that, but I don't think he could do that. Like he hasn't spent years doing those 360 shots. So I think that's totally valid to say, maybe it's not what Joe Palmer wanted to do, so he didn't do it. And it's almost like the closed loop time travel thing. It's like, well, he couldn't do it because that's not what he does. It's not that he's technically incapable.
Yeah.
It's that he has a style. He's an artist.
Exactly. The way he sees and understands story is not through, maybe not through that same kind of visual language of, hey, let's change these panels up. Let's do something funky with the shapes to change the eye line. Not everyone does that. Not everyone tells stories in that way. So I think this book makes an interesting case for bringing in those artists because they kept bringing in artists.
Well,
they
and the
kind of
character design stayed pretty consistent.
Oh yeah.
That's the other
but,
thing
yeah,
too.
But the way,
because sometimes it's very
the
disorienting.
design is there, but the way everyone draws is very different. And so I think the idea that it's kind of like maybe whatever reason that Joe Palmer dropped out of it, they made a choice of, okay, we're going to bring artists in for each of these arcs and let them have a handful of issues to work with, as opposed to just bringing in a new artist for the series. They said, let's bring in a bunch of artists, so it's constantly changing. So that change is part of the book. And I think that was an interesting choice. And maybe this allowed them to work with a bunch of people they wanted to work with. I'm assuming a lot of these people are friends and they're all good. They maybe work with someone on a book somewhere else and like, hey, we want to come in and draw 5 issues of our comic. You get the different perspective. The director thing is perfect. you know some people have signature shots, signature styles, and that even though everything else around it remains the same, it's the same people behind the camera, writers, actors, set dressers, costume, all that's to the same, but the way they see the in television the episode in their mind, the way the camera moves, the shots are going to be different person to person, just like an artist can look at the script and see what the panel breakdown is and visualize it completely different. So I like that there are little flares of that, starting to see that in these two volumes here in 3 and 4, just getting little different storytelling aspects there. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that, and I like that. I think the thing I like the most is that they allowed the artist to do that. That it's not just bring
Right. You're not doing a
your
Jim
line
Palmer
style.
cover band.
Yeah, yeah. It's not just bringing your drawing style, but your storytelling style as well, the way you visualize things. I love that. I love that that's fostered here.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's very cool, and I also think there has to be some local networking camaraderie. The fact that they're drawing so heavily from people who live in the British Isles,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's just going back to. It seemed totally random to me when Will Morris did, the art for one issue.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Until I talked to him. He's in Britain, and
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, well, Declan's in Ireland,
yeah. They're
and
all Irish, UK
I was
based.
like,
Yeah,
Rory McConville. I
yeah,
don't think he's from Idaho. Um, so I was like, okay, now I'm starting to see it, which makes me think, maybe they met at a conference or a networking group, or
a
have
convention could have been. Yeah,
have
yeah,
deeper
yeah.
connections, or it's just local networking. It's literally local
Well,
networking.
again, I think a lot of them, they've worked for the same publications. 2000 AD. Long running sci-fi graphic novel periodical over in the UK. That's the home of Judge Dredd and all that. So if you're someone who works in the medium over in the UK, you've probably worked on 20,000 AD, 2000 AD,
Right.
And so,
It's
so,
like the
so
joke that there's only 5 British actors. It's like every
yeah, yeah,
time
yeah, yeah,
Americans watch a British
yeah.
TV show, they're like, wait, isn't that the guy? It's like, yes, it's the guy from that and that and that and that and that and that. It's like,
Well,
you know,
it, well,
his name is Martin Freeman. He's in everything.
the comp I was going to have is like if you're an actor in New York, you've been on at least 5 episodes of Law and Order as 5 different characters.
Well, yeah, 4 of them are corpses, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you have everyone has been on Law and Order, as well as it as a common point of like on their CV. If you're someone who works in comics and the sci-fi in the genre realm over in the UK, you probably have some connection to 2000 AD. It's just how it goes. And so yeah, again, bring all these different artists in and creators into their book here and allowing them to be a part of their universe while also doing their own thing, I think is very, very cool. And the last thing I had was a little bit, whenever we have a thing on lettering, always like to try and point it out because it's something that is often overlooked. And this one,
Stan.
yeah, stands.
Yeah, I
How,
noticed. I
did you notice this?
noticed.
I was going to
Like,
ask if you did.
yeah, I made a note, but I was like, this is really Alex's domain.
Yeah.
But
But
because of this podcast, I noticed
okay, all
that
right. So
in the future, once he's replaced enough of his body,
yeah,
his letters are shaped more like robots talk.
yes, but you notice so his font goes to the robot talk just like Kevin, right?
I
But
thought maybe there was a subtle
well,
difference, like he was a hybrid, but it definitely
well,
looks more like robot talk.
but the hybrid is his word balloons are still mostly circular, like humans. Kevin's
Ah,
word balloons are
man.
still
I
rectangular.
got it and still missed something,
You were
but
close. You were
I,
close.
I
And,
was
and
like on the lookout for it. Uh,
well, and so this goes back really to what we talked about in Descender and Ascender. The difference between humans, robots, and then the Tim series, right, are more
right.
human-like robots, and what that hybrid is. Stan has that, and they convey that in that way of that he gets the robot font just like Kevin. And again, it's because we have an extended scene of just Kevin and Stan talking to each other. It's very stark. You can see the difference there. Where again, all of Kevin's his word balloons are mostly rectangular. They're rounded off edges, but they're mostly rectangular, while Stan still has a mostly circular word balloon. But you are right. They did make the change and give him the different font because he is now I guess enough of a robot, enough robotic parts to qualify for that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is then starting to get more into FE territory in Descender.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
And
yeah.
hers, I think, changes throughout the series.
Yes,
No
I think
spoilers there.
yeah. But she does have a font. She is presented more like Tim 21 there, where Tim is humanoid, but he still has the robot font, but he has robot font, but human word bubble, that kind of thing. Because the other robots, the ones that look like robots, they get the robot font and they get very squared edges on their word balloons. So
Yeah,
it's
and
little
that's a
things
shout
like
out
that.
to Chris
Oleopolis, I think. Oleopolis.
O'Halloran. Is what I
No,
wanted to
that.
say. The
Oh,
letterer.
no. O'Halloran is the colorist here.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Here it's Haas. It's Haas Olalo Otsmani,
Okay,
who is
got it.
the letter
Yep.
here. But it's those little things, those little touches that, again, if you read this, I mean, if you've been listening the whole way through, I think we talk about lettering enough. Hopefully, maybe you pick up on it. But if you didn't, even if you didn't, it's one of those things that washes over you, that your mind picks up subconsciously, that you don't even know it's happening,
Yeah.
But just the subtle difference when, and again, when it's, especially in that scene, it's Kevin talking to Stan, and you have the same fonts because they're both talking in the robot fonts, but that little subtle difference in the word balloon shape in your mind separates them, and you understand that there's a difference there, that one person is a robot and one now is robot like and cyborg and Stan. And it's that little bit that enters in your mind as you're reading it, that whether you explicitly see it or not, it's there on the page for you. And it's more information in terms of the way you're absorbing the story. It comes at you whether you call it out or not, and that is the mark of good craftsmanship. And
100%. That's a great call out. And even while looking for it and noticing it, there was still slightly more to notice, all the more valuable for discussion. So,
absolutely, yep.
With that, I am certainly finished with my notes as I've already started to bleed into next week accidentally a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, that's the end of what I got right there. So
Excellent. Well, thank you
yeah,
for listening. Thank you for reading, and join us next week for the conclusion, which is volumes 5 and 6, single issue. It's the rest of them. It's all the interstitials and the
it's
final
anything.
five.
So it'll be 25 to 29, and all the issues divisible by 6. 6, 12, 18, 24. That's volume 6 right there. So yeah, if anything you haven't read yet, read them, and in that order, since that's how we're going to discuss them. We're going to read volume 5 first, which wraps up our ongoing narrative, and then we're going to read 6, which is those 4 standalones together. So we want to read them in that order, and I think there'll be a discussion about consuming the story in that way. So we want to kind of have that in our minds as you read the trades as they're numbered. So read 5 and then 6, which seems self-explanatory, but in this case, we really do want to make that explicit. That read those 4 standalones at the end after you've read the conclusion of the ongoing narrative.
Great. We will see you next week, and thanks for listening.
Peace.